Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment of Health Professional Radio. We're going to be having a conversation with Kim Moran. Kim's joining us here from UCB to talk about the latest UCB data presented at the American Association of Neuromuscular and Electrodiagnostic Medicine annual meeting. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Kim Moran.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, tell us a bit about yourself and your role at UCB, if you would.
Sure. I am the head of U.S. Rare Diseases at UCB. My role is to oversee the rare disease commercial organization in the U.S., essentially preparing for our future launches and building the strategy for our entry into several rare diseases. Additionally, I wanted to mention that I also have the privilege to sit on the board of Nile AI, which is an epilepsy care management platform that serves as a digital extension between healthcare providers and patients with the goal of shortening the path to optimal care for epilepsy patients in the U.S.
We're going to talk today about Myasthenia Gravis. Could you tell us a bit about this condition, and then we'll get into the information that you presented, okay?
Sure. Myasthenia Gravis is a rare, chronic, autoimmune neuromuscular condition where basically the body's immune system mistakenly targets the connection between nerves and muscles, essentially the neuromuscular junction. Myasthenia gravis, or MG, is a rare disease that impacts about 200,000 patients in the U.S., EU, and Japan. The symptoms of this actually vary quite widely for patients. Some may have muscle weakness. Others may feel a lot of fatigue, but it starts characteristically with muscle weakness as well as eyelid drooping and sometimes double vision.
You say that the symptoms are very widely among patients. How often is MG misdiagnosed as some other neuromuscular condition?
It does have a tendency to be misdiagnosed, often looked at for other neuromuscular diseases. In some ways, you see, because of the muscle weakness, that MS is a common area that is thought to be an area that the diagnosis may overlap. But unfortunately, or fortunately, a very simple blood test looking for antibodies to the acetylcholine receptor is one of the ways that you can have a positive diagnosis.
Is this something that is genetic, or is it environmental, or is it a combination of the two?
Most likely a combination of the two. Mm-hmm. Occasionally and rarely, but you do sometimes see MG in families, which would indicate a genetic factor. But most would be considered what is known as idiopathic, so unknown cause.
Being a rare disease, I'm certain that there is a huge unmet need. What is the current treatment landscape, and what is the gap in treatment that we're going to address?
Sure. I think first it starts with the disease itself. As we talked about, it's multifactorial in terms of the symptoms that a patient has. So we have to be very individualized and personalized in our treatment. Typically, there are initial medications that are given to those with ocular symptoms, which is a acetylcholine esterase inhibitor. They act for very short periods of time. And then after that, you start to go down a route of typically steroid treatment. After that, immunosuppressant treatment, and then some targeted therapies. Each of those different disease classes all come with benefit and risk for the patient. So it's very much about approach to a tailored treatment and adapted to what the patient's particular symptoms are.
When should someone be concerned about MG? Is this something that can happen in early childhood, adolescence, later in life, or does it run the gamut?
It definitely runs the gamut. We typically see two high prevalence segments. One is women in their 20s and 30s. The other is older men, usually 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. But it can occur at any age. There are even adolescents that are diagnosed with generalized myasthenia gravis. However, it is rare.
Well, give us an overview of the data that was presented at the AANEM this year and its significance.
Sure. So UCB, we presented our investigational data for our generalized myasthenia gravis portfolio. This includes two products, rozanoliximab and zilucoplan. At AANEM, we presented our phase 3 data, and the study was entitled My Caring, and that was investigating rozanoliximab. The other study is a phase 3 study with the name of RAISE or RAISE-XT studies that looked at zilucoplan. These data continue to build the evidence around the complexities of myasthenia gravis. The data provided more understanding of the potential of these two investigational medicines, each with different mechanisms of action, which hope to provide new ways of targeted treatments to meet the unmet needs of this generalized MG population. And I do have to remind folks on the call that this is an investigational medicine and medicine. The safety and efficacy of rozanoliximab as well as zilucoplan have not been established. Neither the treatment is approved for use in any indication by any regulatory authority around the world.
Is there a way to know which compound is going to work best in which type of patient prior to administering it, or do you anticipate using one and if it doesn't work, using the other?
So I would love to say that there's a silver bullet and we could know exactly which medication works for which patient and it's best. Unfortunately, physicians will try to look at the course of the disease. Is it a patient that tends to have, let's say, periods of exacerbations where it's a bit more every couple months, so that they may need a treatment that's more cyclical, whereas there are other patients that may exhibit symptoms on a more regular basis where they would want a more chronic treatment. Those are the two indicators that may help choose a path. What we are seeing is these more targeted therapies seem to be more adapted and personalized for each of the patients with their symptoms.
Are there any other compounds that UCB is developing or planning to place into development other than these two, and why these particular two?
So our first foray into rare disease will be with these two products for the myasthenia gravis population. Mm-hmm. It was an intentional strategy for us to look at, knowing that each patient needs a different type of medication, having these two targeted therapies with different mechanisms of action, it allows us a platform to have flexibility to flex to patients when they need it and in those moments that matter.
And I'm sure it'll be indicated for all ages. That is the hope, yes?
Right now, it is studied in the adult population. Mm-hmm. We will evaluate if it is appropriate to develop the medication for younger age groups. So this is really our first foray into rare disease. We have a third product that is coming in for an ultra-rare mitochondrial disease, mm-hmm. Known as thymidine 2 kinase gene deletion, or TK2D, which is an ultra-rare mitochondrial disease.
Briefly, what are the next steps for these two compounds?
We are very much excited about our anticipated filings for regulatory submission in the EU and Japan, as well as the U.S., for both zilucoplan and rozanoliximab later this year.
Well, would you give our listeners a website where we can learn more?
Sure. You can learn more at www.ucb-usa.com and click in our news section.
Kim, I appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much for joining us here on Health Professional Radio.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Kim Moran. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download, and subscribe at Anchor, Spotify, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.